You're listening to CherryPickin Entertainment.
Throw me the ball and watch what I do with it.
You are now tuned into the CherryPickin podcast with your host, Andre Cherry.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome into another fantastic show of the CherryPickin podcast. Can you believe the playoff rankings that were released last week after week 14 of the college football season? I can't really believe it. It took me a few days to record this podcast because I was trying to collect my thoughts, but the playoff rankings were unveiled for the last week of the regular season, and if you are unaware or been under a rock for this past week, the rankings are as follows. In number 1, Michigan. Number 2, Washington. Number 3, Texas. And number 4, Alabama. So those are their top 4 teams that will make it to the college football playoffs, which will be held, I believe, on New Year's Day. And again, Michigan, Washington, Texas, Alabama. So we've got a team from the Big Ten represented, the Pac-12, the Big 12, and the SEC. The teams that just missed out, we have at number 5, Florida State. They were 13-0. And we have Georgia at 12-1, who lost in the SEC championship game. They were number 1 most of the season. Florida State, undefeated. They were an undefeated Power 5 team, and they just missed out on the playoffs because 2 teams, Texas and Alabama, were deemed more worthy of inclusion to the playoffs. Those teams both have a loss on their record. Michigan and Washington are undefeated. So it's very interesting that these are the teams that the committee chose to make it to the playoffs. My heart breaks for Florida State. I didn't think that they would get dropped from the playoffs. After the SEC championship game concluded, I initially thought the playoff teams would be at number 1, Michigan, number 2, Florida State, number 3, Bama, number 4, Georgia. That's just what I thought after the conclusion of that SEC championship game. My initial reaction was that those were the teams that would be included. Florida State would be included. They are a Power 5 team. They won the ACC. I also thought you could make a case for Georgia because Georgia was number 1. So in my mind, there's no way that they'll lose all the way out of the playoffs, drop all the way down to number 6. They played a very close game against Alabama, lost by 3. You know, I could see a situation in which Georgia would be the number 4 spot. You know, let's not penalize Georgia too harshly because they were number 1 all season. They played well all season. You know, let's drop them down to the number 4 spot. But the committee did something entirely different. They dropped them all the way out to number 6, which I thought was a little crazy. But back to Florida State. Florida State went undefeated this season, beat 2 SEC teams. They won the ACC this season. I never thought for a second that Florida State wouldn't be included in the playoff mix, especially when you consider the College Football Playoff Committee bylaws, which states the College Football Playoff Committee will consider 4 criteria when teams are deemed comparable: championships won, strength of schedule, head-to-head competition, and comparative outcomes of common opponents. I may be in the minority here, but I could make a case for Washington not being included in the playoffs, especially when you consider the words from College Football Playoff Committee Chair Boo Corrigan. He explained on ESPN last week, and I quote, "Florida State is a different team than they were the first 11 weeks, he said. If you look at who they are as a team right now, without Jordan Travis, their quarterback, without that offensive dynamic that he brings to it, they are a different team." End quote. I could honestly argue that Washington looks like a different team than they were in the first 6 weeks of the season. On paper, the Huskies beat 5 ranked opponents, but I would argue the Pac-12 wasn't that strong. Some of those wins included a blowout of USC, but we all know the Trojans were pretenders this season. The Huskies had 6 games where they won by 7 points or fewer, so not necessarily dominating performances by the Huskies, if we're being honest. That's not dominating. They are actually very lucky to be included as well. Florida State had 1 7-point victory all season. The Noles were led all season by quarterback Jordan Travis, who went down in the North Alabama game with a season-ending leg injury. He was sidelined for the final 2 games of the season. This season, Travis was dynamic for the Seminoles as he threw for over 2,700 yards, 20 touchdowns, and only 2 interceptions. He also added 7 rushing touchdowns. His backups haven't necessarily lit up the scoreboard, but this team is anchored by a stout defense and a very solid running game. And my question to the committee is, if there was any doubt about Florida State, why continue ranking them in the top 4 in the weeks that followed the Travis injury? Why not drop the Noles down a few spots? Keeping them at 4 every week seems very confusing when you consider that they have been winning as a team. I never thought the committee would factor into their decision about inclusion into the playoffs the health of one player. As you might imagine, Florida State head coach Mike Norvell was none too pleased about the committee's decision to leave his team out of the playoffs. I have a quote from him, and I quote here, "I am disgusted and infuriated by the committee's decision today to have what was earned on the field taken away because a small group of people decided they knew better than the results of the games," Norvell said in a statement. "What is the point of playing games? Do you tell players it is okay to quit if someone goes down? Do you not play a senior on senior day for fear of injury? Where is the motivation to schedule challenging non-conference games? We are not only an undefeated Power 5 conference champion, but we also played 2 Power 5 non-conference games away from home and won both of them. I don't understand how we are supposed to think this is an acceptable way to evaluate a team. I'm hurting for our players who have displayed a tremendous amount of resilience and response this season. What happened today goes against everything that is true and right in college football. A team that overcame tremendous adversity and found a way to win, doing whatever it took on the field, was cheated today. It is a sad day for college football," end quote. And I have a quote here from Jordan Travis, and this was through Twitter or X, and he tweeted, "Devastated, heartbroken, in so much disbelief right now. I wish my leg broke earlier in the season so y'all could see this team is much more than the quarterback. I thought results matter, 13-0, and this roster matches up across any team in those top 4 rankings. I am so sorry, go Noles." That was his tweet, which is very, very difficult to read, to process, that he would say, "I wish my leg would break earlier in the season," so that you could see how much of a team we really are, how much fight they have to bounce back. It's sad that that's how this team is rewarded for a tremendous season. I mean, I was very impressed to see Florida State back. And I'm an ACC guy, I'm an NC State guy, but Florida State has been the benchmark for so long, not only in the ACC, but in college football. Florida State had been very consistent, had been very dominating, had been a team that was always in the mix, was always in the discussion for the top 10. And to see them come back, it really warmed my heart. You know, it made the ACC seem more legitimate to have Florida State back. Florida State had always been consistent. Clemson, they've been good the last, decade or so, maybe less, but they haven't always been Clemson. The Clemson I know is a team that kind of middle of the pack. I mean, they really hadn't been this dominating until more recently when Dabo Swinney got there. But Florida State had always been good. So the fact that we see Florida State back to those dominating levels, it just really is good for college football. I thought their inclusion in the playoffs would be something great to see, and we don't get that opportunity. We as fans do not get to see what Florida State could do in the playoff situation. I think they are one of the top 4 teams. I truly do. And they get cheated. And it's sad to read those comments from Mike Norvell, and it's devastating to read that from Jordan Travis, who's saying, "I wish my leg broke earlier in the season." Like, how does this young man feel? Like, you put this squarely on his leg. The fact that he got hurt, it's on his shoulders. He has to live with that. That, oh man, because I got hurt, my team missed out on an opportunity to make it to the playoffs. How silly does that seem? How crazy does that seem? This kid is going to live with this forever. That's not fair to him. That's not fair to Florida State. That's not fair to us as college football fans. It's really sad, if I'm being honest. The joy of playing team sports includes the ups and downs of a season and how you respond to those challenges as a team. Florida State found ways to win their games leaning on the collective team, not just one player. The loss to Travis is devastating and unfortunate, but this team is no less deserving of making the playoffs. The committee may have been worried about Florida State potentially getting throttled the same way TCU did last championship game against Georgia, but I'd argue Florida State's defense would keep the Noles in the game. Florida State boasts the 6th best scoring defense in FBS. I also think that having a month to prepare for the game would only benefit Florida State's backups at quarterback. What's most infuriating about the decision to exclude Florida State in the playoffs is that it seems like it was also arbitrary and opinion-based when you look back at what Boo Corrigan said. And I quote, "Florida State is a different team than they were in the first 11 weeks, he said. If you look at who they are as a team right now without Travis, without the offensive dynamic that he brings to it, they are a different team," end quote. What is the point of scheduling and playing these games and doing what you're supposed to do in stacking these wins up if the decision to make the playoffs comes down to whether one player is injured or not and the timing of said injury? The committee's logic also wasn't something we all knew about as this season kicked off, which makes me wonder if coaches, players will be more cautious when deciding to play or sit a player as they get close to the finish line of the season, which seems pretty silly to me when I say it out loud. Like, that seems ridiculous. You play to win the game with the players you have on the roster. Injuries are a part of the game. It happens all the time. How a team responds in the face of adversity is a true test of a winner and a champion. I also wonder, by the committee's criteria, if this would have extended to coaches. What if Jim Harbaugh was suspended for the entire season, not just the regular season, for his part in the sign-stealing scandal? Would the committee have factored that into the decision to include the Wolverines in the playoffs? Is the collective Michigan team worthy of inclusion just because their head coach is not there on the sidelines? Perhaps they are a different team too under those circumstances. It just really seems like BS when you think about it, and as a college football fan, I feel cheated, upset, and disappointed by the decisions of a few people on a made-up committee. I could make a case for including Texas into the playoffs. I really could. Texas ranks number 11 in FPI strength of schedule. They beat Alabama straight up and on the road. It was Alabama's first home non-conference loss since Louisiana Monroe in 2007, and the Longhorns also won the Big 12 this season. I thought Georgia deserved to be included in the playoffs, especially when they were number 1 for most of the season, but the case could be made that since Bama beat them at a neutral site in the SEC championship game, that the Bulldogs lost their opportunity to be a part of the playoffs. My heart says don't include any SEC teams this season, but my head knows that that wouldn't be right. The SEC is a top conference every season for a reason. It wouldn't be right to not include a team from the league's best conference, but then yet again, this is not the SEC playoffs. This wasn't created for the SEC. Who says the SEC needs to be included every year? They are the only Power 5 conference to have at least one team in the playoffs every season, and it makes it hard to include them when, the committee allegedly values wins head-to-head. They value how you finish a season. So you're telling me that those teams are more worthy of being in the playoffs than a team that won its schedule, won the ACC, beat 2 SEC opponents on the road? It doesn't seem fair, and it seems like we're bending to include SEC teams, and that just doesn't seem right to me. The only reason Bama is here is because they got lucky on a last-minute Hail Mary-like heave in the Iron Bowl, which saved their season. One play saved their entire season. A play of luck, really. I know they practice it, they say, but that's extremely lucky. If they were to do that play another time, like run it again, I'm not sure we would have the same outcome. So for me, that's luck. In the corner of the end zone. I mean, come on now. That's the only reason they're in the playoffs is because of that lucky heave. It's outrageous. None of this makes sense. I hate that the committee sacrificed FSU so that an SEC team could join the playoffs this season over a team who, in my opinion, was more deserving than Florida State. The committee is now going to get exactly what they wanted. Alabama is going to win the entire playoffs. And who really wants that aside from Alabama fans? Like, let's just be real here. Who really wants to see Alabama win another championship again? No one. No one. I like Nick Saban. I think he's a cool guy. He seems much cooler now. They do some profile pieces on him at ESPN. I saw one where every championship they build a new house, for a family or a community. Like, I think that's cool. There's some things that he's come out and spoken on. I think he's gotten cooler over time. Great guy. I like how he runs his program, but I don't want to see Alabama win another championship. I don't want to see that. Maybe next season the committee will get it right when the field is expanded to 12 teams, but I really don't have any faith that they'll be able to do that. They are a joke. So there we have it, my friends. I just wanted to get on here, share my little rant, share my little opinion on the college football playoff rankings. I'm disappointed in the teams that were included. I'm disappointed that Florida State wasn't included. It's really unfortunate if you're on that team to have that feeling of you do everything you're supposed to do and it just gets ripped away from you by some sort of arbitrary reasoning. I'll be watching the playoff bowl games this season. I hope you do as well. I'm really interested to see how the playoffs shake out, and maybe I'll do a few more podcasts as we get going here, but this one felt more immediate. This one felt like I needed to come on and just share my thoughts on the playoffs. What do you guys think about the rankings? Did the committee get it right? Did they get it wrong? What would you have done? Tweet me. Hit me up. I would love to hear it. And I'd love to hear from you. But thank you so much for downloading this podcast. Hope you have a good rest of your week. Hope you have a great weekend, and hope you enjoy watching Army Navy this weekend. That was a fun experience. I have a podcast out. You can find it. I went to the game last year when it was in Philly. I believe this year it's in Foxborough, I want to say. But that's a tremendous experience. Hope you watch that game. Hope you enjoy it. Thank you for downloading this episode. Thank you for being a friend. And I will talk to you soon. Take care, everybody. Have a good one. Peace. And as a college football fan, I feel cheated, upset, and disappointed by the decisions of a few people on a made-up committee. Thank you again for tuning into my Cherry Pickin podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please feel free to subscribe to my show and drop me a rating on Apple Podcasts. All of my digital content can be found at the website CherryPickinSports.com. And if you are looking to interact with me via social media, my Twitter handle is @Cherry_Pickin. That's PICKIN. On my Twitter, you'll also find a link to my blog where I post my weekly college football predictions and analysis. I can also be reached via email at CherryPickinSports@gmail.com. Please feel free to reach out to me regarding what you like about this podcast or about what content you'd like to hear more of on future episodes. I sincerely thank you for your support, and I can't wait to talk to you again soon. Take care.